stay on mute.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many people here. My name is Andrew McKean, and I am the Vice Chair of the ICOMOS-UK Cultural Tourism Committee. If you're not so familiar with ICOMOS, but you are more so with the Tourism Society, then the acronym stands for International Council of Monuments and Sites. UK, obviously, you know what that stands for. And then the Cultural Tourism Committee has a specific remit to look at cultural tourism across the UK, which is why it's so pertinent to today's webinar, which we're delighted to be doing in association with the Tourism Society. So as you'll have seen on the event description, as restrictions related to coronavirus are easing, there's been a lot of speculation about a staycation boom, and this could result in a significant visitation to outdoor spaces, from national parks to landscape gardens and to built heritage to play facilities and everything absolutely in between. And this is going to lead to some critical challenges, both around managing those visitors and visitor numbers, as well as trying to attract new visitors post-reopening. And I'm definitely not the main event, so I'm delighted to say that we have representatives here from the National Trust and the National Trust for Scotland, English Heritage and Historic Houses to discuss the challenges or the blessings for this staycation market. And I would just like to add a little point to say that because it's an online event, we have managed to secure speakers who are based everywhere from Loch Ness to Wiltshire. So it's a really, really positive step for us. Just a couple of housekeeping notes that I'll run through very quickly. I'm sure you're all familiar with them from a webinar point of view. To keep your microphones and cameras switched off during the presentations. We will keep all of the questions until after all four speakers to turn it into a panel discussion. However, what I would say is please do submit your questions all the way through all four presentations, and we'll be collecting them and then passing them on ready for the second step of the event. So I think without further ado, I'd like to start with Clea Warner, who is the National Trust for Scotland's General Manager for the Highlands and Islands. So we're delighted that she's joining us. So all we need to do is start the presentation. So over to you, Clea.
Hi, everybody. I think it's just good afternoon. Can I just do a quick check to make sure that you can see the presentation slide? Andrew, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. I just wanted to kind of introduce myself. I'm the General Manager of the Highlands and Islands as part of the National Trust for Scotland's portfolio. Just to set some context, we're a big region. We've got 35,000 hectares of land, 5 national nature reserves, 5,000 archaeological sites and 45 ancient monuments, plus 11 islands, one of which is St Kilda, which is a dual World Heritage Site. So we are finding that although COVID's had a huge impact, as it has with everybody, actually the Highlands and Islands in terms of staycation is a really popular destination for the very reason that I think we all want. The space, after lockdown, people can get out, they can experience lots of different places. And, you know, there's some beaches on the north coast of Scotland that could well be the Caribbean if it wasn't for the temperature being about 20 degrees colder. So it's a really great place to come and feel as if you're away from it all, but it's relatively close by and of course doesn't involve a flight. So staycations are something that we've been familiar with and has been building and building for us going forwards. The problem is that hasn't been without its challenges for us. Now, we're very remote in our look in a lot of these fantastic locations. And we found that because there's no facilities, that's led to a number of problems. So I've just detailed a few here in terms of parking, the fact that because of various rules and regulations with COVID, all the public toilets were locked. camper vans, because people wanted to be able to stay in their own units, but there's not enough facilities for them throughout the Highlands. That created a problem. And the fact is that we were having people experiencing our places that wouldn't usually come to us. So it is a fantastic way of growing your audience and really engaging with lots of different people. However, trying to manage how people use our spaces and protecting them for the future has been a challenge. So I've just put together a few photographs here which show you the type of challenges that we've been facing. So this is the top of Ben Lomond. Now you can see it's very popular. It's near two of the biggest conurbations in Scotland, which is Edinburgh and Glasgow. But the more people that you have walking your footpaths and going out to these kind of cultural spaces, the wider your paths get, which then has a huge impact with regards to conservation and also maintenance. In terms of trying to fix footpaths on top of mountains, usually comes at a hefty price. Parking. We've got to the stage, as you can see, where people are just finding anywhere to park, and that can create issues if you need to get the emergency services in, and also lots of frayed tempers and our staff trying to become kind of road managers, which again brings its own set of challenges. Fires, people coming out, camping, lighting fires, everything's very dry at the moment, and there's a lack of understanding of perhaps how to build a safe fire or when you should or shouldn't. And that recently, as you can see here at the Marlodge estate, had a huge impact. So what have we done about it? I suppose what I want to tell you about is the story of as we've learned, what our approach has been. So we basically put together a top 10 tips. So we knew that people wanted that they know that these are special places and they want to help protect them. But we basically wanted to give them a kind of starter for 10 on, these are the things you need to look at. So we put together a kind of top 10 tips for visiting the countryside. And we actually are part of various groups working with other organisations that are also doing a very similar thing for their outdoor places. So as you can see, it's all basic things, but it's about using the right tone to make sure that people understand that we're asking them to do things to protect things for the future, not because we don't want them to enjoy themselves or we're not really pleased to see them. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour. Moving on, we looked at our social media. Now we have pretty big followings with places like Glencoe. And of course, they are some of the most spectacular bits of scenery, and they're very popular because they're used a lot in films. But again, we needed to find a way and a tone of voice that actually talked to people and help them understand what they needed to do to protect the places, keep themselves safe, and so that they could enjoy themselves without worry. So that's just an example of the type of tone that we've tried to use to, as I say, to make people feel welcome still, which is really important that we do. We've basically now in Scotland, obviously the outdoor access code is slightly different to England, but we can be quite direct, and we're always using examples. So we're always showing people this is what we're finding. We're not just being awkward. We want you to enjoy yourselves, but here's a few examples. And then we get a lot of feedback, a lot of engagement with these type of posts, and it creates debate. So we've also had to learn how to respond to debate, live debate going on our Facebook feeds. And here's just a bit of an example of the type of way that we try and engage people. So this is a great post because there's lots of really positive and great pictures, but it's also counteracted by things that we don't want to see. So it's just a way and an approach of talking to people, being open and honest, but hopefully getting their support for our bigger conservation kind of issues. We've backed that up with signage, which you see everywhere. I mean, obviously everybody's kind of looked at that, but we've tried to get messages that are very direct, easy to read from a car, and just enable people to see why we're asking them to do certain things. And here's just another example. Now, at some point, we've had to get very direct. And so we've had to tackle, shall we say, difficult subjects, which is to do, as you can see here. Now, this has become a huge problem at my lodge. So we've basically come up with a trowel box. Now, again, it's a difficult topic, but it's had huge amounts of coverage and actually really positive feedback from the public. And again, difficult subject. You need to get the tone right, but it's actually really critical. And it's about protecting the places, but also making sure that people have a good time when they go to these places. They don't want to experience kind of mess all over the place. So again, just trying to help people to have a better time. So one of the things that we've also found is that there's certain properties that over the last probably 6 years, their visitor numbers have been gradually rising. And although obviously during kind of lockdown and COVID periods that has reduced, it's now going back up again. So we've also, the Scottish Government has recognised through their Natural and Cultural Heritage Fund that basically there are certain pinch points where we need help. There needs to be facilities. Again, these very remote places are hugely expensive to invest in because there's no infrastructure and they're often very heavily designated and protected. So one of our places is the Tory Gorge National Nature Reserve. So it's way up in the Highlands of Scotland. It is in a really remote place, quite high up, but we need to protect it. Over 100,000 people using it a year. There is no facilities there, and apart from a very small car park. And again, with staycationing, we're using more and more camper vans wanting to use it, just more and more visitation. So we're putting together a project which we're just in the middle of delivering at the moment. And what we have now is we have a very small car park with a windy path that goes down to a historic bridge. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that's the view from the bridge. A very impressive box gorge, and people really enjoy both the thrill and the view of standing on the bridge. But there is no toilets there, there's no kinds of facilities at all. So the project is about basically putting in a gateway to nature. It's a national nature reserve, so we don't want to have too heavy a hand, and we need to be very mindful of where we're working. But we basically, I always say it's the type of experience where you'll go and you can grab a coffee, go to the toilet, but you'll never take your coat off, because actually it's about making people interact and enjoy the outdoor space that they're in. But we need to provide camper van facilities, we need new path networks, and we need more car parking. So we've come up with a way of, if you look to the bottom right of the picture where it says the source, you will see that's where the visitor centre is going to go. And if you look at the top of the picture, you'll see where the bridge is and the old car park. So we've got this huge national nature reserve. It's an absolute treasure. There's huge amounts to see, but at the moment, people can't experience it all. So all the visitation is in one small part. So the idea is to stretch that out, and as we go, to be able to provide more facilities for people. And these are just a few more close-ups. You'll see the little yellow blob is actually that's where the visitor centre will be. In the graphics, it looks really big, but actually it's pretty small. But as you can see, it's pavilions that are undercover, but it's actually open to the elements. So again, you can see we're providing camper van parking, coach parking, car parking, toilets, and a grab and go cafe. And so we are investing because we recognise that staycationing, the thing with the Highlands is, what we do know is when people come, they tend to come back. So that's from kind of previous research. So even as staycations change and habits change again, when perhaps visitation abroad opens up, actually we're confident that people will still want to use this facility. So the investment is sound, and it will provide a really fantastic experience for everybody. Just another shot there from the side. And that's the view from the top of the bridge. So it's the only picture that I've ever seen where you actually get to see what a big drop is underneath people's feet. So that was just a bit of a run through of what we've experienced probably and has kind of come to the fore over the last kind of year or so, in particular the last 3 months, and perhaps some more positive forward-thinking things that we're trying to do to engage with our visitors and make sure that everybody has the best time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. That was fascinating, and a really, really good run through of both the the positives and negatives that I think have come out of the last the last year or so, and some very direct marketing, which I think 2 years ago people probably weren't thinking that they would have to be doing quite so much focus on. But fantastic nonetheless. Again, a reminder to put your questions in the chat. And next, I'd like to introduce Liz Page, who is from English Heritage, and she's Territory Director West, working in on-site visitor experience. So over to you, Liz.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I think somebody else is sharing their screen for me. We're doing a bit of a Boris Johnson, Chris Whitty double act on. Next slide, please.
Yeah, bear with me a second. Let's start with it. Sorry, Liz, just
no problem at all.
Try and get this to work. So if I do that and that, is that right? Can everybody see that? Can you see that, Liz?
I can. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Good. I'll now mute then if I can, and let you make a start. But just tell me when you want the pages to change, and I'll try and do that for you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm actually a last-minute substitution for Heather Redmond, our Head of On-Site Visitor Experience, who unfortunately hasn't been able to make it. So this is Heather's presentation, and I'll do my best to get it through it with you. The brief, of course, is about challenges and blessings, but there's quite a bit in this presentation about research as well, which I will probably go through reasonably quickly because I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those challenges and blessings at our own sites. So next slide, please. So our first challenge really was to reopen our sites last summer as the restrictions eased after lockdown 1. And one sort of challenge throughout all of this, I think, has been the constant need to adapt to changing levels of restrictions and to how we do things. And we are largely outdoor attractions at English Heritage, not entirely, of course, but largely outdoor. We have 400 sites altogether. And the first blessing was that many people wanted to come to outdoor sites because suddenly outdoor was very fashionable, or in the fresh air. And as Clea has said, it's a similar experience, really. People want to get away from it all in a way that feels safe. And what we did was, like many organisations, introduced pre-booking, because a challenge is certainly managing visitor numbers in a safe way. And we worked out site by site what our capacities would be with a 2-metre distance between visitors. So that was quite an exercise. It was a multiplication of area of site versus thought dwell time, and that gave us capacities. So we were able to overcome that, and the pre-booking actually became a blessing because we knew how many people to expect at any particular session. We also produced a lot of new signage. The blue, cornflower blue, is all the COVID-related signage. And we also innovated with what has again become a blessing, which was agile interpretation. And that's the sort of sage green sign you can see there where it says listen. So instead of perhaps going around with an audio guide that would have to be cleansed and all the rest of it, you could use your own device to scan the QR code and get instant interpretation. And that's now something we're rolling out more widely, and has again proved to be a blessing. So a really, really mixed bag of challenges and blessings. Next slide, please. So as I say, we've looked at research right throughout this process, and all the research that you will see on this screen and on other screens is based on Alva's information. And we've tried to sort of gauge consumer confidence, as you can see, particularly with the emergence of the Delta variant. People at one point in May thought the worst had passed, but of course things changed and government restrictions are are continuing at the moment. And there's also still this great ongoing certainty regarding international travel, which we hear about changing almost on a day-by-day basis, don't we? Which countries are green, which countries are amber. And therefore, certainly, you know, the staycation, we know this, but the research is backing up, is here and here to stay. Next slide, please. So again, research is showing what this means for domestic holidays. We know that people are keen to get out and about if they can again. And we've looked at sort of outdoor attractions, particularly obviously for ourselves. And we found that people's comfort in visiting outdoor attractions is highest, sort of gardens, country parks, outdoor heritage spaces, and the domestic holiday markets continuing to look really positive. So we have got those challenges and blessings continuing. In terms of areas, Southwest England is undoubtedly remaining the most popular destination for English tourists. I'm actually responsible for the Southwest of England and can personally vouch for the fact there's huge demand at our Southwest sites, particularly Tintagel Castle on the North Cornwall coast. Pre-bookings are very, very high. So challenges and blessings then of this particular aspect of the staycation. Challenges are actually in recruiting staff. Cornwall as a whole is inundated with visitors, and all hospitality outlets are very busy. So recruitment is a big challenge for us at the moment, and trying to bring in perhaps staff from outside the area. We do have a resource we can call on, but accommodation is at a massive premium in Cornwall at the moment. You know, with people who've got a spare room, maybe letting it out for Airbnb. So I would say that's one of our biggest challenges down in the Southwest, recruitment of staff. Managing visitor numbers continues to be reasonably straightforward because of pre-booking, but there is an increasing expectation amongst people on a staycation that they will also be able to walk up and book a ticket on the spot, and we're now moving towards a more blended admissions process, particularly as we anticipate restrictions possibly being easing further on July the 19th. Next slide, please. At the same time as managing the existing staycation issues, we're also still trying to look further ahead, because this will pass. And we're looking at how we need to adjust our offer in times ahead, particularly looking at the expectations of the younger generation, the millennials and the generation Z. Different want more than just a day out. They expect to have sustainable evidence of sustainable activities at our sites. They like to purchase local food. They wish, quite often there's the rise of a new word I only heard for the first time last week, which was the rise of the workation, where people want to get away, but in a sort of work environment. And again, this back to nature theme that Clea has talked about so eloquently. People want to be back close to nature, and this brings us back to the Cornwall challenges and blessings as well. Next slide, please. So the latest reports are telling us that key barriers still to travel for Europeans coming into the country, and people also at home still feeling some discomfort about travel. So the staycation's here for sure. And there are the challenges around, as I've described, some destinations becoming overcrowded, while less popular destinations actually remain quiet, and particularly indoor ones at the moment. But again, that could change very soon. Accessibility by car, all the pressures on car parking that Clea has talked about, we are also experiencing to an extent. But there's also this feeling of well-being and families being together as well, and I think that's a blessing, and I think it helps us looking at our sort of family offer, which I'll sort of come on to in a moment. So next slide, please. This is just, I'm going to skim past this. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the fact that people have been saving over the last year, and we're going to see over the next few weeks whether that will lead to a surge in spending. So next slide, please. So I think people's expectations are changing, and our own research in English heritage has identified a great day out for everyone in the family, and opportunities for children to have fun are really, really important. And it's not enough just to open your doors. We've got to bring history to life, and playgrounds particularly seem to be becoming really important. What you can see here is a lovely new playground we've introduced at Boscobel House in Shropshire. Lots of sort of natural play, and it's introducing, I think, a blessing of this staycation is that by introducing families to heritage attractions through play, you have the opportunity to engage with the audience and introduce them to history in a way that perhaps we might not have had the opportunity in the past when people were just flying off to Spain for their holiday. This exploration at home really is a chance to reach new audiences and hopefully retain them as well. So next slide, please. So a little bit more about the Boscobel House project, which launched this spring. Boscobel House is a fantastic place. It's the story of where the future King Charles hid up the royal oak tree during the Civil War and made his great escape from there to France. It's a brilliant story. We have replanted the oak pasture where he hid to be able to show for future generations what it used to look like. And the story in the house, you go around with an interactive candle and put it down in various spots, and it illuminates things that tell this amazing hide and seek story at Boscobel. And that really does seem to have engaged that family audience I was talking about. The second story at Boscobel is about farming. It later became a Victorian farm, and we've introduced some rare breeds of sheep and pigs and other farmyard animals, again to bring the stories to life for families to enjoy their visit. I'm conscious of time, so next slide, please. We've also really now focusing on storytelling and bringing stories to life, and that the top images you can see are at Bolsover, where we have costumed characters telling its many stories. And the bottom pictures are at Pendennis Castle, again back down in Cornwall, where we are trying to bring its military history to life through a wonderful band of volunteers. And I would say another blessing of this staycation has been the growth in people willing to volunteer at our sites at home and to really help us get involved and bring those stories to life. And I think we might be near the end. So in summary, I think there's been a mixture of challenges and blessings. We've had some challenges of recruitment, capacities, etc. And we're continuing to find challenges as restrictions change and having to adapt quickly. But the blessings, very much a chance to engage with new audiences in a more interactive way and get people more involved with our cultural heritage. And that has to be a good thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. That was fascinating. And I'd agree. I think that was a really interesting take on how you can use innovative play experiences to engage families. And looking at your example of Boscobel House and things like the interactive candlesticks is absolutely fascinating. Again, to the wider audience, a reminder about questions. Keep on sending them in. And then next up, we have Pam Smith, who's the National Trust's Senior National Garden and Parklands Consultant. So coming with a different point of view. So over to you, Pam.
Hello, sorry about that. My mute wouldn't turn off. I hope you can all see my slides.
Yep.
Yeah, great. And you can see me as well. So thank you. Yeah, I've titled my talk, Get Ready for Our Next 125 Years, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but last year should have been the National Trust's 125th birthday. And we had great plans. And as you'll appreciate, we had to change them. However, we have lots of activity this year, which we're just pulling on. So it's our 126th anniversary this year. And really, we've had a very long-term strategy, and COVID has just slightly changed it, and it's accelerated some things, highlighted some things. And actually, although it's been a really difficult time for everybody, similar to some your other speakers, it's highlighted a little bit of silver lining that we'd like to develop further. I've heard many similar experiences of what we've experienced in the National Trust from previous speakers, and I'd really like to focus really on the people as much as the place, so our staff, our volunteers, and actually our visitors, and share some of our experience and learning. See if I can't. For some reason, my slide isn't moving.
Hi, Pam. You might need to exit the presentation mode to do that.
So I press escape.
Yes.
Sounds quite drastic, doesn't it? Ah, that's not working either. It worked before. Sorry about this, but anyway, you can see the picture on the right is Packwood House. You can enjoy seeing Packwood House while I... Yeah, none of my buttons are working now for some reason. Shall I stop share and just... Shall I try again?
Yeah, that's okay. Give me a second. I can share your slides on your behalf.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, you can ask me when to go to the next
No
slide.
problem. So my plan B was needed after all. Sorry. Anyway, I'll just explain. Right. Yeah, so as I say, it should have been our 125th birthday. We've had to make some changes, and we're just finding ways at the moment of actually recording some of the best practice and some of the accidental discoveries. Starting with our visitors, as you know, the gardens and houses, we closed them very early on in lockdown, as well as our shops and cafes. Initially, we really wanted to keep our gardens open, and the plan was to open them for free. Unfortunately, after the first weekend of trying this, it was just understood to be not possible. It was great that we attracted lots of people who took the opportunity to come to a National Trust garden for free, but it just really filled up our car parks. The fact that the houses and the cafes were shut and we had limited toilet space just meant we were inundated with lots of visitors who didn't really know the site. And so we weren't able to gauge how many people were coming. It was difficult for car parking. It was difficult for our neighbours living down the road with all the extra cars. So after the first weekend, we had to make the difficult decision to close our gardens as well. Some of our larger countryside car parks also had to close, again, just because of managing the numbers. But obviously, all our coastline and countryside all remained open. So we've gradually been reopening, and similar to English Heritage, we've had a booking system through Eventbrite. We needed something that we could get up and running very quickly, and people have, again, as with English Heritage, a half-hour slot to arrive. We gradually reopened. We worked out calculations of gardens that could reopen quite soon, and others where it was just really difficult because of bottlenecks. But obviously this was at a time when we had very limited facilities on site as well. So the benefit of the booking system, and some properties are actually considering carrying this on as we move away from bookings for many others, is that we're obviously able to predict visitors. So we knew the visitor numbers coming, which made it a really nice sort of staggered flow, and it was easier to manage one-way systems. It was easier to engage with visitors. We didn't have our normal ticket places open, so people were showing their booking barcode through the car window, and we have the member of staff or occasionally a volunteer actually scanning it through the glass of the car window. So it was better to manage it with gradual groups and drifts of people coming. The other thing that we found really useful was if you visited, we were able to actually show you information about what to expect with your visit, which if people just turned up, that was very hard to communicate any changes on site, any different regulations, the fact that the cafe won't be open, for example, or the house. So it enabled us that alongside with the booking information, we would give people literally titled what to expect on your visit, and it told people where they were parking and where they were able to show their ticket, because the whole system of actually arriving was changed. Bookings were open to all, members and non-members. We did have from day one about 20% no shows, which was really frustrating. And we think people, particularly non-members, obviously there was no transaction charge, were actually booking several slots and then deciding which was the most convenient based on the weather. We did get quite a lot of feedback from people about how hard it was to book because the booking slots were going very quickly, and should members have prior have easier booking and be able to book first, and actually that actually goes against the charity law, so we weren't able to offer that. Having said that, 96% of people booking were members, so even if there'd been a members only offer, it wouldn't really have released many more tickets. So by early summer we started to reopen gardens. We got up to 129, which is just over half our gardens, and they were on the booking system. Today we've got 220. The houses, some houses opened on May 17th, but obviously covering into Northern Ireland and Wales, we've got different restrictions to follow. But it was very important that we were able to stagger these and actually try different models of working, and social media was really key in this, and getting messages across, letting people see our properties without having to visit, and that's been really grown. That's massively grown our social media, and actually in particular for our garden teams, which is the teams I work with, we were able to talk to our members and the people who are missing our gardens, and actually to our staff and volunteers through this. Can I have the next slide, please? And as you have probably all noticed in your local parks and perhaps visiting gardens, and as colleagues on this conference will know as well, it's been really welcomed and we've had some really good feedback. And I know our garden teams, although initially it was great for the ones who were still at work gardening and just been able to get on with it, as we say, everyone really missed having visitors in the garden. So it was so good to see people starting to come back, and the feedback has been great all the way through, from people actually chatting on site and actually giving us some really good feedback through our social media. And we've had quite a lot of people who have joined as a result of their visit that they made, sometimes as a guest of another member or just as their very first visit with their family. Have my next slide, please. So I do want to talk about the staff experience, because this has really impacted a lot of staff in ways of working. The majority of our staff were furloughed. I think at one point we're up to 80% of staff. Sorry, can I go backwards? Thanks. So we're up to about 80% of staff furloughed, and we actually do still have some staff furloughed today. Many garden staff were furloughed. The majority of garden staff were furloughed, and almost all our volunteering stopped. That was in line with some government guidance and about our risk assessments. We did have some volunteers who could do what they volunteered at, working from home, and some very sort of like lone worker and more remote support. So when it was decided how many staff to furlough, each area of the National Trust activity looked at what was an essential task work, and we drew up, last year there was myself and two colleagues who weren't furloughed, and we drew up an essential task list which was approved, and that was obviously monitoring collections, and I'm talking about the gardens, but obviously this equally applies to the house collections, obviously our compliance and our safety. And then what was really hard was our minimal essential maintenance. And it was really about watering plants in glass houses and maintaining things that might die if they're not looked after or may be unsafe. But in terms of cutting the grass, in terms of sowing seeds, in terms of harvesting some things, sometimes there were no staff in gardens. Sometimes we had some gardens with every member of staff furloughed. And we've had to adapt. So as staff have come back, and actually as our visitors have come back, whether the, you know, with the gardens being open, we've actually had to leave some areas looking fallow in 2020. And that's actually continued. I mean, the gardeners among you will realise our horticultural calendar is a year, really, 9 months minimum. So what impacted us last autumn, we will feel the impact for in our gardens for some time to come. Some of our adaptations we've made, and some of you who may have visited National Trust gardens in this period may have noticed these. We've had to really prioritise our time, money and labour into looking after our most significant plants and areas of the garden. Now, sometimes that may not be the area with the greatest visitor footfall, and that's been a really hard debate on each property to manage about the visitor benefit and what visitors would like to see. But that may be, in terms of historic significance or in terms of the value of those plants and their maintenance needs, not where we would choose to be working. So it has been a hard balance, but obviously we wanted to maintain, you know, our landscape and our plant significance. We have reduced planting and sowing in kitchen gardens. Some kitchen gardens have put annual meadow mixes in, some have turfed over areas, some have mulched them, some have covered them in matting, some have put very quick crops in, green manures, and we've had to adapt to our seasonal displays. So for example, all our spring bulb displays, we would normally be buying those in July and August and planting them in September, October. We had no staff to order them or plant them, and we had a budget freeze, so we weren't able to buy them. So the spring 2021 has impacted most of our gardens, and so we've got a lot less spring displays. We gave some guidance. We wanted staff. We had staff working in areas that weren't their normal workplace. We had staff covering for staff who were away, who were ill, who were isolating. So we didn't have the normal working day. So we wanted to give as much guidance to our staff teams so that if they were covering for someone else, we were helping them as much as possible. And also to help those conversations on site, instead of the head gardener having to do loads of research about cheaper ways to plant that bed for that season, we did some centrally resourced information that they could use to influence their decisions without everyone having to reinvent the wheel. And we've had to minimise a lot of tasks. We may have missed some pruning in orchards, for example, but also it was an opportunity to carry on a campaign we've been part of before, which is No Mow May, which is a national campaign run by the Plant Life charity. And so we obviously did reduce a lot of grass cutting, but we were quite clever with how we did it. So when gardens open, there was something interesting to see. But also, it wasn't about we couldn't cut, it was that we actively wanted to be part of this very important wildlife campaign. Managing one-way systems was very difficult. In some gardens where we've got difficult paths, grass paths, bottlenecks, finding a one-way system was very difficult. But equally, where we would normally say after wet weather, or after a cold spell, close a path off and allow people to go a different route, we couldn't always do that. So we couldn't rest some areas that would normally be rested at that time of year because they were an essential part of the one-way system. And it is amazing in a 8-acre garden how hard it is to do a one-way system and how not to just make it like a conveyor belt of directing people around. We did very recently, at the end of May, for all our staff teams, produce a garden recovery plan. And this is because, although we accept everyone's been doing a really good job, some of our gardeners have been battling with this now for nearly 12 months, and they were ready to hear about the next steps, even if we weren't quite ready to know what they are or how we're going to resource them. And actually, we have our new head of gardens. This post has been empty for 2.5 years, and he starts on the 2nd of August. So there are things we are waiting for our new head of profession to start with, but we felt we couldn't wait till the 2nd of August to actually say what some of the new direction is. And I think you'll appreciate there isn't a holding position with gardens. We could close the houses and there'd be someone there to monitor the collections and humidity and security, but generally they would still stay there. The beds were still there, the plates were still on the walls. With gardens, if we shut the gates and walk away, there isn't a holding position, whether there's visitors or money or staff. The gardens have carried on growing, and that has been hard. And equally, it's hard in our recovery plan, where we want to keep the organisation stable in terms of manage our charitable purpose and resource very carefully, but also encourage growth. For gardens, how do we do that? How do we encourage growth with having something for people to see at the same time as lessening some of the offer and having less staff and less resources? Next slide, please. Thanks. So we do have some key lessons. Managing expectations through pre-visit and on-site information is actually something I think we would always say we try to achieve before the pandemic. But no matter how much you can put on a website, or in our case, our National Trust handbook, sometimes people don't see that or don't realise what that means till they get there. But one lesson that we did learn was actually something I pointed out to our Marcoms team. I was looking at the system our visitors used to book, because I hadn't done it. So I thought, I wonder what the experience is. And I noticed all the photos we were showing were our stock photos that may have been on that website for 3 or 4 years. And they were showing a garden absolutely full of flowers, or a vegetable garden full of vegetables on the booking page, when I knew if people went to that wall garden, those vegetables were never sown in the spring. So it was just a case of changing the photos to be a bit less bountiful in some gardens, but also making the photos, so checking with the gardens that you have planted pumpkins, haven't you? Because the photo on the booking site is asking people, saying, come and enjoy our pumpkin display, for example. So we really wanted to make sure, and that was extra work when we're really trying to juggle and work with pace, managing a booking system and everything. But I think it was really important, no matter what we said in the text about, please, bear with us and expect things to be a little different. The photos people see of spring bulbs and everything, that's what sticks in people's minds, and we were perhaps setting people up to be disappointed. So it was really important. And also, again, on-site information, and again, the diagram on the right with those 4 columns, that is some of our internal guidance. So we did do, to help the properties, we provided lots of templates, we had lots of webinars and lots of guidance to minimise their time they had to spend thinking about it, but to make sure we could just get as good a standard as possible. And this is an example from a sort of inspiration pack about the sorts of conversations, the language and the signage that can be used on site. And these were all done as a result of the pandemic. But equally, there were all topics that we talk about. There were tones, having a sense of humour, having a spirit of place about the signage that you choose for a site, talking about wildlife, talking about local produce and noticing nature. These were all messages we had before. It was just a reminder that rather than apologise for what people can't see, let's really celebrate what you can see. And in terms of wildlife, we had more wildlife creeping into our gardens because they were quieter. We also did really well with our social media campaign, and we really wanted it to reflect what some of the experiences people would have had if they were visiting us, rather than normally it's been an additional to a visit. So we started a campaign from our garden to yours, and this was gardening tips, YouTube clips, interviews with head gardeners, lots of things, and that excuse me, and that was really popular. We also did a Twitter Q&A. I think it's the first Tuesday of the month. We have a different feel, and a lot of our staff stand by and they can carry on working on the laptop, but questions will pop up and we put the answer in a central place, which is then posted to the person who posed it on Twitter. And we're actually going to carry that going on. We've really celebrated people being outdoors. We know lots of people have experienced being outdoors, but we also know for a lot of people, a half hour, an hour walk around a garden is their outdoor experience. It isn't all about going to the amazing Highlands or the Lake District. But this has also been a really nice introduction about walking. I'm really interested in about the whole ethos of how we can encourage more people to walk around our parklands and gardens as well. Some of the dilemmas we have now: how and when do we start communicating the impact and the longer term implications? So I feel although we did a lot of press and we tried to give as much pre-visit information as possible, I think our honeymoon period, sometimes our visitors didn't last as long as we would have liked. And there was some people who didn't think that we should perhaps have furloughed staff and that gardeners should have been an essential work task and everyone would have been should have been at work, and so there would have been little change to our gardens. But you know, we've lost staff, we've lost budgets, we've had to think differently. The gardens have been growing without us. There are bigger changes ahead. However, there are changes we were planning anyway as part of our sustainability and our mitigation for climate change. So it's not just because of this, but we need, the discussions we're having now is how and when to communicate, because a lot of people, as they feel their lives are getting back to normal, they may expect our gardens and our properties to get back to normal. And some of the changes that have come across from the pandemic, or some of the changes we have plans that have allowed us to speed them up, are permanent changes. And actually, how do we communicate those? For example, we have had to close some of our shops and cafes permanently. And while there's a grab and go, people may not realise that the seating cafe actually will never be opening. It's not a temporary closure, and the grab and go is a replacement. And that's going to be quite a hard message, and be interesting to see how that impacts our visitor experience. And also internally as well as externally, how to communicate time for plan for the future. So we have lots of stakeholders. You know, we work with the Gardens Trust, for example. If we want to make changes to our gardens, how do we communicate that we need time to take a couple of steps back and really think about what were the pluses and minuses, what were the plans we had in place before, do we need to sense check those, are there things that have come to the fore more that perhaps were lower down the list before? And sometimes we just need to give ourselves some time to do this, but how do we communicate that when we're open 364? And actually, this has speeded up some innovative things. It's given us a bit of bravery to pilot things, because we had to, that we may have had to think about a lot longer before we piloted before. So I think there's some positives about making us as National Trust staff and our volunteers be a bit braver. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are the opportunities. I won't read through them all, but we really appreciate the value of our gardens. Lots of people do, and I think we need to move that forward. I thought the sense of humour and the creative output of our garden teams through social media was great. It really championed their skills and their voice, and I want to carry that on, and the creativity of what we've done in our gardens. So it's really accelerated, but we're not low in standards. I want to stress that. We're just changing in some places the planting at some point that needs lower standards to make it look as good as what it's replaced. Next slide, please. Moving forward, I did feel I did have to touch on this. We predicted a loss of 200 million. We've had 100 million of annual savings. We've stopped or deferred some projects, although I'm happy to report that some are starting back up again. 40 million of non-pay cuts, but as you will know through the press, we've had over 1,000 redundancies. However, our house collections, our gardens and ranger teams were actually had to make less cuts than others. And it's prompted a restructure. But having said that, our restructure hasn't changed our ambition of everyone welcome and climate action to be carbon net zero by 2030. And that is what I was touching on before about we were planning on rethinking some of our garden management and design to meet our carbon net zero and be more sustainable. Last slide, please. So I'd just like to say, you know, we are thinking of the next 125 years. Our birthday party is still continuing, and our 21st century strategy is that we do want to continue to maintain the high standards of care, and that's for everything. It's for the house collections, it's for the gardens, it's for wildlife, and we're finding a way to make this relevant for day-to-day lives. And I think the nice thing about our landscapes, people can use them for exactly what they were designed for. People aren't sleeping in the beds, people aren't cooking on the Arda, and they're not allowed to eat at the dining room tables, but they can use the gardens and our parklands for exactly what they were designed for, and that's something to celebrate. And I just think we've got an amazing asset, the National Trust of the Gardens, 240 gardens across a broad geographical area, across a broad historic period. And I just think we can deliver all the elements of the National Trust strategy going forward with our outdoor spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. that was a really interesting insight into some aspects that are actually very rarely in the press around the challenges of managing outdoor landscapes and gardens whilst you're in a lockdown situation, and how it actually has a much more practical, tangible, long-term impact on the visitor experience. So thank you very much. Just a reminder again about questions, and then on to our last but by no means least presenter. So William Cartwright-Ignat is Vice President of the European Historic Houses, and he's the owner of Iford Manor in Wiltshire and sits on the Wessex Regional Committee. So over to you, William.
Thank you. Well, hello everybody, and it's from Wiltshire at Iford Manor, where we not only live and manage the property, but I'm also involved with historic houses at a more national level. And I suppose a little introduction to Historic Houses, which is an organisation that covers the interests of about 1,500 privately owned historic properties across the UK, each of them with their quirks and their private owners, and often very eccentric people, often very good business people. But they're scattered throughout the country. And of course, that in itself is interesting because it puts them at the heart, in many cases, of local communities. But of course, it means that some of them are exceptionally remote. Highly varied activities. A photograph of our Bounce Back Festival last year when we were just able to do an outdoor concert, and often quite agile people who live in these places because we don't have to ask a committee for an answer, we just do it. Highly varied financial capacity to invest commensurately. So some obviously are in a better position in their economic cycle than others. But above all, it's worth bearing in mind that these privately owned houses, of the 1,500, an enormous proportion are open to the general visiting public on either a daily or a less regular basis. So they are a bedrock of this sort of heritage sites tourism portfolio that we have in the UK. So with that in mind, I suppose I really want to look at a slightly higher level view of staycations, and to take a look really at how I think really we're in a really very positive position. I think staycations are not without their challenges, but essentially a good thing. Here's why. We've had what might be described by economists as an enforced market shift. We've got a year of restricted openings, of restricted numbers, of restricted capacities, obviously massive issues for profitability. There was this sudden change in visitor profiles. At Iford, for example, normally we would be 40% international. So we were closed all of last year, but this year we're still 0% international. So we've got to change the way that we look at our markets. And we had, obviously a lot of staycations, but we also had lots of people discovering Iford during the break. They were faute de mieux, for want of anything else, they had this ability to walk into the countryside from their house on a daily basis, and they discovered the countryside again. But this enforced market shift puts us as an industry into uncharted territory. There is no, historical response that we can look at in textbooks about how tourism should, respond to a pandemic in the, internet age. We need to be agile. We have to be quick on our feet. We need to be risk takers in many respects to think about what might come next. And we have to budget on the basis of uncertainty. Now, staycations, which is obviously not only people traveling in their local area, but also people traveling to other parts of the UK. So essentially, we're talking about the internal economy. For me, it's about renewed engagement. I think that the ability that people had during the pandemic to re-engage with local heritage, to visit places that they had never been before, I can't tell you the number of people who say, oh, we've never been down that road. It always looked very narrow. And then they arrive at Iford and it's this little jewel in a valley, and then suddenly they wish they'd come years ago and they only live a mile away. It's countless the number of times that happens. Cultural heritage has provided people safe outdoor experiences in a way that indoor spaces and places just couldn't. And so we have been relied on in many ways to provide a sense of normality, to be the place where people could visit, even though maybe in the past they would never have gone for a walk in the countryside, and it's all completely new to them. And I think, therefore, there is this desire in the population to continue that sense of discovery about where they live, whether that's in their local space or more widely in the UK. Now, outdoor events were a big thing last year. They continue to be a big thing this year. We have some concerts going on in the field this weekend coming, and you know, you can do that under the current rules, which is fantastic. However uncertain the rule unlocking is for the next few months, we can still get people out and about, and I would encourage people to do so. The music industry needs the gigs, and frankly, people need something to do. So, you know, we should do that. But all of this brings with it consequent new markets. We've discovered new customers, people who never thought of heritage as something that they were interested in. You know, it's got this potentially a slightly staid atmosphere in some places, and actually we don't need to be like that. People want to discover their history. So we have a re-engagement, finally, between the public and cultural heritage. And so if we look at what that engenders, that renewed engagement leads to a renewed relevance of the cultural site to the person engaging with it. Now, that might be within the local economy in the sense that it creates jobs, it creates cream teas to take granny to, it creates lots of opportunities to steward for events. It might be that it engages people with their local history because they're interested in the fact that their name comes from a local area, or that their grandmother or grandfather lived in the mill or worked for a family, or whatever it was. It could be that there's something in the local community through connecting through the local schools, because obviously places like the houses that we're talking about and the parks and the gardens are part of those communities, and the schools and the primary schools need to have practical physical engagement to learn about history and the countryside. And ultimately it results in an increased love of cultural heritage sites. And what does that do? It means that the people who are local, national, more wide, love heritage, and therefore those are the voters, and therefore the politicians love heritage more, and that leads to national support such as the Cultural Recovery Fund. And it is worth noting that in this pandemic, culture has, at least in terms of heritage culture, has actually been, I think, very well served. I mean, it's not a political point, just in practical terms, the fact that we've been capable of accessing funding as private owners to help to maintain historic sites has been unusual, and doesn't come without its thanks from us, because we couldn't have kept places like IFOD going through the pandemic without that financial support. But financial support can't last forever for obvious reasons, so we need to take our local community's enthusiasm for us and take that forward into the future. Now, the good news is that this sort of direction of travel actually can become a virtuous circle. And here's how. I think with a renewed engagement and relevance, we can convince people to support us more, and ultimately by doing that, we improve the condition of the properties that we maintain. They become capable of survival. After all, we all want the long-term sustainability of our houses across the country. And heritage is ultimately just a cost centre more than anything. It creates a more sustainable and engaging visit. And by creating a better visitability, you result in events and visits and education projects and engagement sort of, you know, increasing in its own way, which creates this sense of circularity. It creates a bigger value that heritage brings to the community, and it becomes more relevant, and that's the key. But if you look at that as the UK market, that's good news in itself. Next year, of course, God willing, we will have the opening up of the inbound market. Well, let's add that in. If you add the inbound market to this, once you get a better visitor experience, you can market through the DMOs and, you know, the Visit Englands of this world out to the world, and you've got an increased marketability. Now that in itself is good news because it brings more people coming in, so that restarts the inbound market on what is already, I hope, a positive position to be in, and it improves the sector finances further. So it's on us, therefore, to hold on to our new markets through education, through engagement, through creating events and activities and ways for people to touch heritage. Touch points are crucial, but then to add in that inbound market, which we all relied on in the past, and which is making this particular year, I think, a struggle for many, because they're used to marketing to foreign tour groups and to foreign operators, but at the moment are finding they just plain can't. So we need long-term resilience. That's what we're all looking for. We need it underpinned by relevance, because ultimately historic properties are only going to survive, and this shows itself over and over again, if they are relevant to a community, whether that's a local community, a wider community, an esoteric community, it doesn't matter, so long as somebody is supporting that piece of heritage. Now, as heritage operators, we need to make this a success ourselves. It's not on everyone else to do it, it's on us. So we need to engage, secure the audiences now. Education, diversity of offering is important. Our audiences are newly plural, and we need to give a plurality of offering. We need to tell stories differently and from different perspectives. If we don't, we alienate, and that is in itself potentially damaging to heritage in general. I think we need to thank people more. We're good at thanking people, but actually we've got supporters of all types, from one end of the scale through volunteers to the other end of the scale at politicians' levels. And in all sides of politics, you've got people who want to support heritage. They see the value that heritage brings to people, to voters. And we need to secure that support now. And of course, we need to prepare now for the return of inbound next year. But whilst all of this may be good news looking ahead, the pitfalls that we've heard through three excellent speakers so far in the practical terms are principally, in my view, of over-visitation. The damage to heritage. Heritage is delicate, and especially you see it in the attrition to gardens and fabrics on floors and all of the rest of it. And so we have to be careful to avoid damaging our heritage irretrievably. Also damages the experience. If you put too many people in a museum, you can't see the art. And I think that's something we've all experienced on holiday in some of the great museums of the world, some of the great gardens of the world, you see it. So does it mean we have to limit access? And this creates a paradox in itself. How do we democratize access to wonderful heritage sites whilst protecting those heritage sites at the same time? I think we've heard a lot about that already, so I won't go into the detail. Finally, I would say just don't lose sight of the key point. In all of this navigation, we've heard a lot about how we all need to come up with new, the new normal, whatever that's going to be, whether the cafe is closed or whether we're investing in a new restaurant. We need to not lose sight of the key point that cultural heritage is the guiding light. It is a connection, as I say, it's a connection to our past in an increasingly virtual world. It informs us about our present and about our future. And if we don't create the connections between the past and the future, people will stop wanting to support heritage. So by staying relative, we can inform the future and give interest to the present and hopefully create a sustainable tourism economy for the next few years. So that's why I'm positive about things. I hope you are too.
Thank you very much, William. I think that was a fantastically positive note to finish on from a speaker's point of view. So what I will do now is hand over to my colleague Kevin Cayley, Chairman of the Tourism Society, just to handle the Q&A. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Andrew. Wow, some really interesting presentations covering quite a wide range of topics, and as a result we've got a lot of questions in that are quite diverse as well, so I'm going to try and pull some of those together if I can, and I'll address these not necessarily to any individual, albeit some of them might be more relevant to some rather than others, but perhaps for William, actually, just following on from that presentation, because William, you mentioned educating new visitors, and And I wonder, is there a how do you go about that? Does this new audience brought by the staycation market, this new audience to heritage, which is slightly different perhaps to our traditional heritage market, does this audience therefore require a different way of interpreting your heritage, or even a different comms strategy? And I'll maybe ask you to respond to that one first, but open it to everyone else as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I was really interested to see Claire's National Trust solution with, you know, communication to people being a real thrust to that. And I thought that actually this idea that we need to connect with people anew really starts to come, for me, it reminds me of the Countryside Code, but I think we almost need a how to visit heritage code, because actually we are seeing across our properties in historic houses, and I'm sure others are too, that actually there is significant damage caused through it's not intentional damage, it's just ignorance, and it's not ignorance is a bad thing, because you can solve it by educating. And I don't think people want to let their children pull up alliums in flower borders and play swords with them, but ultimately that's what children do. So we have to educate parents and children to understand that these are there for a reason, and that they're there because they're pretty, and that you can kick a football around the car park. So I think that's really important. How you do it, as I think we saw from maybe a difference in the way signs are written in north of the border and south of the border, was quite interesting, is of course down to personal choice and how not to alienate your customer. It's a delicate balance.
Absolutely. Would anybody else like to come in on that one?
Pam, National Trust, I think it's quite interesting about how we make our places accessible, and I just sort of compare it a bit sometimes when people walk into the cafes. We don't just say soup and sandwich, we give people a choice and we hint at what's in it and what it'll taste like, and yet we say gardens and houses, and it's like they're so different. And I think we need to almost treat them like a menu of activities so we can show what you can do, because from my experience generally visitors are more cautious, they're more they're not going to damage something, like you say, and usually it's because of lack of knowledge. And actually we need to encourage them to say, no, you can open the gate, you can go up there, you can go in. So it's the opposite. We often have to encourage our visitors to do things rather than stop them doing things. But I think it is about how we create the menu so people are comfortable going if they know what they're allowed to do and what's expected of them. And I think we just need to use the language a bit more clever. And I just go to our menus and think how creative we are in anticipating what the experience will be before you've even tasted it. Can we do that with our cultural heritage as well?
Hi, Kevin. Clear here from the NTS. I think the footpath example is quite a good example of that. Obviously, lots of people getting out and about, following the footpath, and kind of interesting enough, social distancing started to create issues for us because people were obviously wanting to keep well up away from each other. So instead of everybody staying on the same path, they all spread themselves hugely across the top of the hill, which is brilliant because they're all playing by the rules. But of course, what that does is it starts to create down peat, and it has like huge ramifications, which then are incredibly costly as a conservation charity to have to bring helicopters in and everything else to fix. And interestingly, we did a couple of weeks where we really concentrated on that in kind of newspapers and kind of adverts, etc. And actually people were fascinated because they just didn't, and things like using kind of walking poles and having sharp tips, which starts to aerate the ground and dries everything out and then starts to degrade the footpath. And as you kind of, people are really fascinated and ask some really smart and great questions. So it is about, it's not done deliberately at all. It's just the new circumstance that everybody finds themselves in and trying to share as much information as we can.
And can I ask on that, Claire, did your communication, your comms, because you talked a bit about your comms approach, did it make a difference to visitor management? Did it make a difference to behaviour?
Massively. And again, it started up great debates in the threads of the Facebook pages, and people were really interested. And it allowed us, thinking about everybody on this call is kind of, needs as much support as they can to the ever self-fulfilling circle of kind of income versus conservation. I think that it allowed us to talk about our conservation message, which of course is what we are, a conservation charity, and that conversation got broader. So it was a really good thing all round, I think.
One of the audience has asked the question: Did the influx of visitors to the National Trust for Scotland take you by surprise? Was that a
There'd been, when we started getting, as the lockdown started to be gradually, I mean, obviously we were slightly behind you in England, and as it started to be relaxed, we saw various kind of places near to the big conurbations where people had a lot less. If you were in lockdown in the Highlands, you were just sat in the middle of a big space. Whereas if you were in one of the bigger conurbations, of course, like everywhere, you really wanted to get out. And it was at the properties that were closest to those large conurbations that we noticed at first. And then it just became bigger and bigger, and as people could travel further and further up the country. So it wasn't a total surprise, but how quickly it happened, was quite shocking in certain properties.
And so did you ever, and I suppose this goes across all of the organisations, do you ever get to the point where you think, actually, because you're I suppose conditioned to market and to attract new visitors, do you get to a point where you think, actually, our strategy should be not marketing and not promoting for certain times, and we change our comms to try and manage the volume coming to us, almost dissuading people from coming through your comms? It's kind of, is that a strategy that you've ever considered, or is it?
Hi, it's Liz from English Heritage. I think pre-booking is really been the key to sort of managing that situation, so that you don't get into a position where you are completely, utterly overwhelmed, and particularly where we've still got limits on capacities with social distancing. So I do think, I mean, I appreciate with Clears and some of the National Trust's big outdoor areas, that's much more difficult to manage. But if you have got an area that's inside a pay barrier, it can be managed. And it's been quite nice because it's spread people out across the day, as Pam alluded to at the National Trust as well, so that you can manage things more. And I think on the comms side, I agree with other speakers that getting the message over on your website or other channels, what to expect for the visit. And then I believe actually removing barriers and, you know, what's on board, show you what you can do in a day. A one-way route gently steers you. So hopefully you are sticking to paths and not having to squeeze past somebody coming the other way. So I think there are mitigating measures that you can do to still provide a really safe and enjoyable experience for quite a large number of people.
Okay.
I can, if I may, I'll just back up the comment about pre-booking. I mean, we're a tiny attraction. We take 200 or 300 people a day at the most, because the garden isn't huge. And we were actually looking in 2019 at introducing digital ticketing anyway. So the fact that the pandemic sort of produced this slew of companies that were all fighting for this business has been extremely helpful, because I think it has spurred on an innovation in a market which would otherwise have been pretty 1990s, to be honest, and hadn't really moved on for a while. So I think that's very helpful. And to anyone who's considering using digital ticketing, just do it. It's not worth thinking about the 2, 3, 5% cost to the value. It saves you a lot of time, and it improves the interaction that the customer has when they come to the gate.
Does it affect you mentioned democratization of heritage, though, in terms of getting access to all? Does the digital ticketing kind of work across all markets, or do you think it kind of restricts them?
And we are available on the phone, so to the extent that it's usually our older citizens who will ring up and say, I don't have a computer, which I totally understand. I'd love not to have a computer. It's I think it is an issue. It's going to diminish as an issue over the years, of course, but at the moment we need to be open to the prospect of people not being able to book online. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. I just want to touch on a question that probably relates to you, William, and to Liz to some extent, which is about play areas. I think we've all seen, in fact, recently, I think Prince Charles has started to build play areas, and some of his Dumfries House, I think, is getting a big play area. And I remember reading a little bit in the press about this, and there's one or two questions come up from the audience. Is this dumbing down heritage? And how does the traditional audience respond to this? How do playgrounds reflect the heritage of the site? And is it kind of, are we dumbing down heritage a little bit by trying to just attract a family audience for a day trip and spend some money almost irrespective?
I can go first on that if you like. I think it's really important to say that everything we do at English Heritage is authentic, based on research, and that goes through the whole visitor offer. That includes, of course, fun elements like playgrounds, but the example I showed at Boscobel House, it was very much a lot of thinking about that play area, where it was located on the site. We used, you could see natural materials, and we've put in fencing, we're replanting part of that area as well to conserve the site. So I think it's doing it in that correct way, in that context. Where the playground is at Boscobel, it's behind the tea room, so families can use it, children can run around, and they're having a lovely time, but they're not disturbing maybe a more traditional culture-seeking audience who are looking for different things from the visit. So I think sort of zoning areas, keeping it natural, keeping it part of the overall offer, and really good quality, I think, meet the threshold for what people expect from the cultural heritage.
Okay.
Can I just add to that as well? So I completely agree, it's very similar to National Trust, but equally, these are gardens where families played for generations. And sometimes we've got amazing records of what the families did and their children did, and forts they built and everything. So it's about how we allow all families to engage with the site, but also it's about that element of playfulness. And it isn't just about children. It's not about someone sitting at a picnic table, always where their children are elsewhere playing. We're trying to encourage family play and playfulness through the site. And one of our big projects is Sudbury Children's House, Sudbury Children's Country House. So it'd be a whole country house designed and run by children, and we're looking at the same for the garden. And we're not looking at play equipment, we're looking at playful horticulture. So that would be an interesting one to see. So I think it's very relevant, and why wouldn't we want to invite families?
And does the traditional audience agree with this, do you think? Is it kind of, or is there a tension there?
I think with all different uses of sites and different audiences on different days, and I'm a different audience on different days, depending on where I'm going and who I'm going with. So yeah, but I think there's room for all. And actually it's nice to interact with other people. And also in particular for Sudbury, the garden will be amazing for really keen gardeners. And it'll just happen to be playful and interesting for children.
Good. Okay, thanks for that. Just moving on, we're getting close to running out of time, but there was a question about recruitment issues, particularly Liz, I think, mentioned it at English Heritage recruiting, and I know at National Trust we've talked about the redundancies there. Given that we're also talking about, unemployment as a result of COVID, issues in Cornwall and Devon, particularly about that, what steps are the organisations taking to try and train and recruit people? And actually, in terms of the National Trust, the 1,000 redundancies, are we expecting that to be re-recruiting people in the future, or is it is everywhere going to be slightly thinned down?
Shall I start then? Well, recruitment with the National Trust has always been an issue. We quite often have head gardener roles vacant for 2-3 years, take a few times to actually recruit. We're just advertising for our next round of apprentices. So all the way through this, our apprentices were kept on. Some were furloughed, some weren't, depending on the amount of coursework they had, and they weren't cut from the roles. We carried them on. So we're about to recruit many apprentices, including 10 gardening apprentices to start in September, and that's fully funded. Yeah, we are still recruiting. We had, as a result of such a large redundancy, and a lot of people chose to leave, retire early, voluntary redundancy, we had to restructure everything, and as a result new roles are created. The role I do now in the trust didn't exist pre-COVID. It was created as part of the restructure, and I started in this role from a previous role with the trust on the 1st of March. So yeah, I see we need to rethink how we're going to manage our gardens in the future with sustainability and climate change, and no doubt gardens will carry on projects and need to recruit more gardeners. So this is a moment in time, and I think for gardens this is another point of history like the First World War, 2 World Wars, where we really notice that it's a marker in garden history what has happened during the pandemic. And it'd be interesting to look back in a few years about how that changed our gardens going forward.
Something which was quite interesting in the private sector, I think, obviously there were a very wide range of responses to the pandemic because there is a wide range of properties. But I think from our point of view at IFOD, we took an early decision to not open in 2020. That was largely because we are a private residence as well as other things. And so obviously we had people in the community here to protect. But it also meant we could give certainty to the team. And actually, although we furloughed a number of administrative members of staff, actually the gardening team largely remained on all the way through. I think it's interesting that risk assessments are so basically down to the individuals doing the risk assessments. It's very interesting how they differ across the responses in the pandemic. And our assessment was that actually once in about June, July, it became clear that outdoor was more or less okay. If we sterilized everything and the rest of it took all the appropriate measures, we could actually get volunteers back. So the benefit that we've had has been that our volunteering team in the garden and our gardening team have been able to work through. And I think from a mental health perspective, that's probably been beneficial. And I know a lot of other historic properties in the private sector did the same. The effect of that is, of course, that we are perhaps in a different position with where the gardens are at as regards how we would be if we had furloughed everybody and allowed you, because you can't furlough nature, as I think Pam was explaining rather eloquently earlier. So yes, very different responses across the tourism sector, I think.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think we're just about out of time. One last question, I suppose. I'm looking at the questions in the chat box. If pre-booking slots are filling up quickly, how do you keep the interest of those unable to book? So we'll go across everyone with an answer to that one. Do you want to start, William, given that you're on the screen?
Yeah, of course. I think we're not going to lose. We were saying earlier before we were starting how long is this Zoom chat thing going to carry on? I think it's with us to stay. I think people have learnt to be online and to gain information online. And I think that many places, including obviously English Heritage and the Trust very successfully with their marketing prowess that they have been able to take learning and sort of the digital journals online so we can communicate through those means. I think the private sector can learn a lot from that and look forward to learning more over the years to communicate with people who want to come to IFOD but maybe have to experience it digitally.
And Liz, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we sort of sometimes forget that we haven't always been able to accommodate all visitors anyway, that in the past it was kind of self-regulating. If you turned up somewhere and the car park was full, then you wouldn't be able to get in and people just sort of went off. I think the beauty with pre-booking is that you've immediately got that point of engagement with people before they arrive. So they can see there's an option. If that session's full, there is another option of a session at a dedicated time that they could go to. So I'd hope in many ways we might capture more people. We've also at English Heritage vastly increased our digital offer during the lockdowns. So again, it's a new way of engaging people and hopefully they will feel that way and perhaps come and see us another time if they can't do so immediately.
Okay, thanks. Claire, do you have anything?
From our perspective, we do pre-booking at places like Culloden, for instance, and because of the fact that we actually obviously aren't having our international visitors back yet, it's actually working out okay. We haven't got to the stage where, because they're set up to take such huge capacity, with just the national visitation levels, we're actually managing all right. But we did trial several things, particularly with Culloden, because we usually have a very big commemorative event there in April, and of course we couldn't do that. So we actually did that virtually, and it was probably one of the most successful and well attended that we've ever done. And then on the flip side of that coin was St Kilda, because we couldn't put any staff out there, because obviously if anything went wrong or anybody got ill, then there's huge issues in terms of trying to get people back off island. So we had to work out a way of being able to engage people when they couldn't go and visit. And that was all done digitally, telling stories, blogs. And again, it was really well engaged with, and I think that's something that we will layer on as part of our visitor experience, just as the norm going forward.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of people saying that a lot of this digital conversation will continue. Pam, I'll leave the last word to you.
Oh, okay. Well, just to add to, yes, we did do a lot of digital and increased it a lot, but I think one of the things that probably people don't realise about National Trust is we work a lot with people who will never visit our sites. So we have staff who are not property based. They never work at our sites. They work with communities. They work with other organisations. I spent quite a few weeks working with Bowland Botanical Gardens last year with a project for them. So we're critical friends to other organisations and community groups who we can help develop their volunteering in public parks or develop with their local heritage. So that is also a way that we can increase, our audiences who aren't necessarily visitors. They can still be part of our ethos and believe in what we're doing, but not visit a site. And that's a massive increase going forward.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all. It's been great talking to you. I will hand back now to the conference chair, to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So it's just a quick final word to say thank you very much all to our speakers. It's been fantastic to have you all, and thank you all for attending on your lunch break. It's been brilliant to see such a wide ranging crowd. So we'll have the recording on the ICOMOS YouTube channel shortly. So if you want to come back and revisit anything, please do so. And in the meantime, feel free to visit our respective websites for ICOMOS-UK and the Tourism Society to find out more information. And hopefully we'll be doing more of these in the future, so please do keep an eye out. But thank you again from myself and the team.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.